I think it's so interesting that the Christian Science Monitor last week asked the question, and it's connected to my question. Can you, forgot about that. The headline asks the question, can parenting be taught? And I think you all addressed that very well, and I think it was a wonderful panel. But my question is, well, it came up, I have a degree in elementary ed, and one of the teachers, the professor said, you're not putting something into a child, you're drawing out. And I would like all of your comments of your faith, whether you feel you have to get the sin out that the child was born with, or as one brought out so beautifully, just enhance what they already have.
Okay, let's go with the
already said, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you might find that Sikh Dharma has like a sort of an unusual version of original sin, and we believe the souls come here as a learning lesson with previous learning lessons. And so the soul comes in not clean, but with an opportunity that's considered envious, even amongst the angels, a chance to come to earth. It's rarely given. It's an amazing situation. And like in a Christian path, we believe that in the power of the grace of God. And ultimately, that's the only thing you have to go with you to address these difficulties.
So, from Hindu faith, I think there is the theory of the karma, right? The reincarnation and the theory of karma. And so a soul comes into this planet literally to start to work towards bettering themselves in whatever way. So you start from a baseline and then you keep moving forward. And that, in the scriptures as well, there's a term for that which is called self-effort. So it's up to the individual really, which is why it's important that everybody is putting in that effort to just better themselves. It's that self-improvement. And the word there in the scriptures is called purushartha, which is a Sanskrit word, and it's similar to Latin, an ancient language, which is no longer spoken, but trying to get it back in place. So from a child's perspective, when the child is born, I think it's almost the duty of the parents to just start to inculcate the good values in them, and as time progresses, as they're exposed to more of the spirituality and knowing more about their own culture and their own value systems, etc., the hope is that that soul starts to evolve over time, and they start to move towards seeing the light and getting more knowledge, more wisdom, etc. And there is an element of grace, as that was mentioned, and that is another piece of importance even in the Hindu culture, which is very similar to the Sikh culture, by the way. So that's another key piece.
My star child image, borrowed from Dennis Benson, was one response to your question. Matthew Fox, as an alternative to the original sin doctrine, invites us to consider original blessing.
Okay. Other questions?
I do. I agree with much of what Dr. Bender said about a child being, for me, there is nothing as pure as a baby. Yes, they are a selfish little creature because they don't know about the world around them, and they can't do anything, they're helpless. They can't do anything for themselves. So they're totally self-centered at that moment because of their needs. But we have God is in them. them, is my belief. The Spirit is there, and we do need to nourish it and help them discover the best expression of that Spirit of God.
All right, yes.
Okay, I learned when I was 19 and talking to a 12-year-old up in summer camp. She was from a mixed marriage, and I learned from her that parents have to choose one faith and raise the child in that faith because the kids need it, so they don't go looking for trouble later on. But since there was no Jewish representative, and I managed by luck, I guess, or, intervention from God to raise kids who stayed Jewish, I'd like to tell how I did it.
Please do.
Okay, it's my right. So let me give you a little background.
By the way, we tried to get,
Yes.
three or four times, we tried to get a Jewish representative, and
You could be
sorry we could not have one. But please, please.
Well, my rabbi uses me as an example, so I feel I'm somewhat qualified on this. But let me give you a little background. I was raised in semi-Orthodox tradition, broke away from it when I was 10 or 12, and married my husband, who was not at the time very into practicing Judaism. But we had a discussion on the best way to keep our kids Jewish, and we decided, since we're not going to go to services all that often, that maybe just keeping kosher would be the way to do it. And so over the years, we had a few experiences. My older daughter saw her father, when we were out with his father, eating. The kids and I would eat fish or dairy when we went out, and my husband would eat meat, even though it wasn't kosher. So my daughter's watching my husband, and she says, "Daddy, that looks good, can I taste it?" And I looked at her, and, well, first we looked at each other, then I looked at her and I said, "Well, you know it's not kosher." And she said, "Yeah." So we looked at each other again, and I said, "Okay, one bite." And she goes, "Gee, Daddy, that's good. You're lucky you're not kosher." And she never again, as far as I know, in her life asked for something that wasn't. But my kids, I guess it worked, because all my kids are now practicing Orthodox Jews. And to show how deep the faith was, when my daughter was in the hospital for the last time, and I told her I was angry with God because she was such a good person and he was taking her from me. She said, "Don't be angry." And she gave me a 20-minute lecture on why I shouldn't be angry with God. And it didn't work, but she had a lot of faith, and I think my other kids do too, although I hope I never have to find out that way. And we lived in a community, just as an aside, my husband and I chose to live in a mixed racial, religious community, so my kids had friends of all races and religions. And my son actually started practicing his religion, because when he was explaining some of the laws to a Christian friend of his, the guy looked at him and said, "Well, you know all this, why aren't you doing it?" And so my son decided that he got better. So you never know what will turn on a kid.
Thank you. All right, Kathy.
It's nice to hear all the good things, but in my world, I see all the bad things, okay? Those failures, if you want to use that terminology.
What
Okay.
setting are you in?
Pardon me?
What setting?
I'm a lawyer. I got DUIs, I got capital murders, okay, etc. What do you, any of you, do with your children who have committed any of those kind of things? I haven't heard anything like that yet.
I made one indirect reference to it when I said it's important for our children to know they could never do anything that would cause us to not love them, even though we may not like their behaviors. Can't condone them. I think the issue is in our families, are we setting appropriate boundaries and helping our children to learn education and the spiritual development. And quite frankly, a lot of that is lacking. And so you see, in many ways, the dark side of our culture. And I think that's probably a failure of not only parenting, but also of nurturing our children in the faith. And not just a failure of family, but also of the village.
So as I mentioned, I have 3 boys, and they're all grown up now, so they're all much taller than I am. My oldest one is working, and the youngest one is just out of getting to college, and 3 more years and he'll be out. So there are a lot of influences, and so I think that does not change. So I think what makes it perhaps a little bit amenable for them would be if they have a place to go back perhaps and even talk about it. And having boys is different from having girls, I can tell you that. The boys, you get barely 1 sentence maybe, or half a sentence out, if you're lucky. So it's not that they're very chatty. So you don't get the whole scoop of things that are happening in school or in college. And again, with the rule of 18 that I find when they think that they're totally independent and they can do whatever they want and they don't need any support or help, so that tends to, again, rub off. So it is important to keep that balance, and in our household, I think the way we've tried to keep that, or some semblance of it, is to always let them know that, is to first of all have those conversations with them, or try to have them as best as possible, and let them know that, we're there to, if they have any questions or anything that they want to come share. Now, like I said, with boys, it doesn't come as easy, so they feel like they have to go through, whatever they need to learn. And so that's the best I think we can do, and as well as then the community support is always the fundamental piece. So I think that forms a big part. Like, we have many different temples here, Hindu temples, and there's a huge community. So we try to get them involved in some activities, though as they grow up, there's less chances to get them to volunteer at the temple or do other things, but we try to keep that up as best as possible, so that there's that connection point. I look at it as having as many touch points as possible, and each time they get to, dip in, even for a moment, they get re-energized or reinforced. So we try to keep that going as well.
I'm going to take it from a slightly different slant. This, of course, is a Sikh perspective. Each person comes into the earth plane with their own destiny. And we typically project, this is not to deny any of the elements of good parenting and love and proper environment, but each person has their own destiny to fulfill. In the tradition of the saints, when we look at a person, normally what we see is very different than the reality of what's there. I mean, we love our kids, and we think the best of them even when they're acting in the worst. But this comes to the point of letting go. You do your job as a parent properly, and you offer your prayer always, and you remain with them in love. But you cannot live their lives for them.
I would agree with that. I think the difficulty is that it starts so far before you see them having DUIs and so on. As a child, one of the needs of children is protection. Another one is discipline, boundaries being set for them, limits being set, and for them to know what those limits are. And they will test them every time when they know what the rule is in the household or whatever. They'll test it. And that brings me to one thing that I had wanted to say, which is that most parents tell me when I've asked in workshops and so on to finish the sentence, the most difficult thing about parenting is, and they finish it. And what I learned is that a huge percentage of them would say maintaining consistency. being consistent. Yes, I can have rules, and today I'm strong and I hold the rules with the child and I try to make them accountable. And tomorrow I'm not feeling so good, so I just let it slide, let it go, and don't say anything, don't do anything. And that speaks to the vigilance of parenting. And then the whole goal of discipline is to help the child learn, not to punish them, but to help them learn so that they become self-disciplined. And certainly all children don't learn that, and I don't have the answer as to why some do and some don't. It may be their particular destiny, I don't know that. But I think we have to keep working at doing the best job we can.
I just want to briefly add the whole justice dimension. You've been reading the paper. In terms of measures of a child's well-being, Arizona is toward the bottom of our 50 states. We are not investing in our children. We need some Goldwater Republicans who believed that we should invest in human capital. You know that our investment in education is next to last. Only Mississippi is below us. We need earlier interventions in our children, earlier even than K through 12. You've seen the brain research. A child's brain is 25% wired at birth, 75% wired at the end of the first year, 90% wired at the end of the third year. We can now measure the brain processing information, can visually see it on the screen, and we're discovering that a lot of the teenagers, young adults that have been involved in illegal destructive behaviors have underwired brains. For every dollar that we spend on a child in the first 3 years of life, we will save $19 later. So why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? Because children don't have a voice, and that's why it takes a village to be a voice for those who otherwise have no voice. And in many ways, the problems that Dave has talked about is because our village is failing.
Okay. I must ask a bad question. Carol Furlong, correct? What I wanted to know was your responses to what do you do as parents with children that have failed your expectations for them? Okay? How do you deal with a child that has DUI, that has committed murder, that has been sexually abused as a minor or whatever. And I got one illustration, a divorce. In some Christian churches, you become a second-class Christian. Okay? Does that mean you become a second-class Christian as far as a parent is concerned?
Thank you, David. We'll just have one response because there's half of the hands up.
I wanted to say that I support what Dr. Bender said about you continue to love your child, let your child know that you are there for them, but they have to suffer the consequences of their behavior. And if they have to go to jail, you're still there. When they have a trial, you need to be there, be supportive of them, but let them know that what they have done is not acceptable.
Okay, I thank you for the question. Clear back, yes.
Hi, quick question I had, you touched on it earlier about boys. I have 3 boys. And my point with my boys now, they are in college. And do the right thing, but you see with the Rule 18, they think they know everything, so they don't come to you to help. My problem is, I have a problem letting them go on their own, because I said, I can still be a life coach, you still need help. They go, no. But now I have one son that you can see that he's emotionally and physically bankrupt. He has come to a bump in the road, and he doesn't know how to get out of it. And in terms of college is too much, working and going to college is too much. He's a good kid. He hasn't got any DUIs or anything like that, but you just see that he has a lot of stress. And when I told him to go to church, didn't have to go to ours, but go to someone's church, he didn't feel welcome. He didn't get that village welcome. So now, if mom and dad suggest going to church, anybody's church, it's like I'm cursing him out. I'm setting him up for another failure. So how do you rescue your child, or their young adult, that you know is doing good, but he needs help? And every time when he came to you, my help became void to him. And he's a son, so I don't have any daughters. In this case, I wish I did, because we have hot chocolate and talk. But my sons, I barely get 2 words.
Okay, Anita.
Yeah, I thought I'd take that because I do have 3 boys, and so I think I can understand some of your frustration there, perhaps. So one of the things is perhaps to get him to talk to somebody else, because sometimes the direct messages coming from parents go through one ear, maybe they don't even come out from the other ear, they just get lost somewhere. So definitely, I think it would help to have somebody else, talk to him. Maybe it's another trusted family member, or maybe somebody from the village community, or maybe it's another. I know therapy sounds a little bit more extreme, and he's probably not ready to do something like that, and it may not be necessary, but it's just talking to somebody else that shares and perhaps reinforces some of the things, the very same things that you're saying to him, which is not wrong, but hearing it from another, source may sometimes reaffirm. I do have, in my practice, because I do have a health and wellness place in Tempe, I do see people like that, where they're all on the right track, they have everything going for them, but something's not firing, something's not clicking that says, I should probably just course correct a little bit, and I can be the best person around. So it just takes a little bit of fine tuning sometimes. So I would suggest, doing something like that.
Okay. Wait.
Thanks everyone for sharing. So I really like what you had to say about the Fowler stages of development in terms of faith. I was thinking what you said about the independent stage. It seems to be my experience that most people are in that stage. I like to think that I'm interdependent, but I have my own black and white views on certain things. So my question is, within each of your own faiths, if you have a particular belief which you believe to be your truth, and if you have children that are coming to you and they're questioning those truths or those things that you're teaching them, how can you still try to develop that interdependence, that inclusion, while still maybe maintaining what your particular faith is? And just provide a little bit of background. Me and my fiance, we're getting married. And I was raised Jewish, she was raised Christian. We're on the same page spiritually, but we know that there's going to be outside influences from family, from friends, and we would love to raise our kids with that interdependence, that inclusion, but still being respectful of everything else. And what you're experiencing with being able to harness that.
John Wesley, the founder of Methodist back in the early 18th century in England, didn't expect even his Methodists to be of one mind, but he hoped we could be of one heart. And I think it's important in faith traditions and also in the family circle. But again, your children will gain their sense of inclusion, not so much from what they hear you say, but what they see you doing. And so looking for opportunities to embrace diversity. Years ago, Marty warned us that one of the biggest threats to our social fabric in America was what he called privatism. And by that he meant a concern for me and my circle of mind, those who look and act and think and believe and vote like I do. I don't really care about anybody else. And Marty was right, wasn't he? And so how do we counter that? And we do that by looking for opportunities to embrace diversity.
Okay, all right. Real quickly.
Okay,
I'll make this very quick, but I want to take advantage of this panel. Arizona Interfaith has become so important to most of us and to us as adults. But one thing that Arizona Interfaith is looking at is developing a strong youth leadership group. That's our goal, that's our hope, and here are my experts as far as giving us some suggestions as to what things you would like to see us do. One of our members just had to leave earlier, but I want to get just some ideas from you. What directions should we take?
One of the things I think that is so helpful to young people is to be involved in a project. A number of years ago, Arizona Interfaith, I think 3 different years, had a time when it was announced and youth were solicited from all the different faith groups, churches, and so on, and they went to the Mormon cannery in Mesa and spent a Saturday working together. We also had built a habitat house. Of course, anyone under 16 can't work on a habitat project, but if we can have some kind of projects that the youth can do together where they're really doing hands-on help for other people. Because when they went to the Mormon cannery, they were packaging food that was to be distributed to every, not feeding kitchen, but food bank in the state of Arizona. Yes, and they understood that they were doing something that was helpful for other people. And I think that's one way that they can learn, get to know each other, and it breaks down the walls of hatred or suspicion or fear by developing a friend who is of another faith group.
Okay, we're gonna have one more quick question.
My name is András. I was born in Budapest, Hungary in '44 to a mother who was excommunicated from, she was Catholic, excommunicated because she married my father, who was a Protestant. And anyway, fast forward, we escaped to this country and grew up on the East Coast in a very Methodist, a typical neighborhood in the suburbs, in the Christian faith. And since then, since high school, I've been all over the world, and I've had experiences with each of the faiths represented here. With the last journey into India to be with Sri Ravi Shankar, who is a spiritual leader and well accepted as a foundation with every country represented at the United Nations. So it's the biggest NGO. So the reason I told you that is because I've been a witness to the evolution of humanity in this since the Second World War. And so I have an interesting perspective on not only the faiths, but the families and how life, what's happened to humanity. And I kind of see that in a simple way, humanity is really suffering from a simple case of mistaken identity. We just don't know who we are. And as individuals and as faiths, I mean, there's so many questions coming to the head. So that being said, the reason I said that was it's easier to forgive ourselves if we can just see it as really just a mistake. We don't know who we are. And the children right now coming into a world that is such a turmoil really need all of us to come together. I mean, that's why I came here, is because of this interfaith group. But to really see the big picture right now, because our children, our very own children, You know, we can't just live in our village. Our village is global. And what they see, not only in television, well, it's not even television anymore, computers and cell phones. they know, they can know what's going on anywhere in the world at any time. And the fear that permeates the atmosphere is so thick everywhere that it really needs an incredible concerted effort of all of us who have any idea of going beyond just saying, well, I want to leave a better word for my children, and don't bother to ask the children what kind of world they want. And so, anyway, I want to share that. My partner, my aunt, and I have a nonprofit, and this is what we do. We are going around and helping recreate family and in communities. And anyway, we have a website, www.peaceproduction.org. And so I do have a question. What is it that the interfaith community how can that be addressed? Because it's just the children going out in the world have to deal with that.
Okay, what I'd like to do, because our time is up, I'd like to ask each of the panel members to just make a very brief closing statement, if you would please, about how you feel we can address that and how we can help the young people of our world.
My brief response to your concern would be the question isn't who are we, but whose are we?
I would say that I think it will take a collaborative effort so that we stop looking at boundaries and different cultures and faiths, and we start to look at the bigger picture and wanting to make a difference for all children across the world, because I think it starts from when you're a child. We've already talked about that, so I think it's important to focus on that.
We use the term Kali to describe this period, which means that basically God is very rarely remembered or seen in our world. We think the materialism God's everything, but there was a trick in the Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga is a period of the greatest contrast between the light and the dark. It was always considered the time when the opportunity for spiritual advancement was at its highest. So rather than like in Sodom and Gomorrah, that don't look at Sodom and Gomorrah because you turn to stone, you'll be paralyzed. You turn the other way, and you have that opportunity. And so interfaith is a mechanism for that, where you can come together in your commonality. The commonality is remembrance and faith of God.
I don't have the answer for the whole world, but I think if each one of us is true to who we know ourselves to be and faithful to God, if we can show respect for every person, and particularly children, youth, as well as other adults, be respectful. If we can keep the goal in mind that we're hoping that we can all be respectful, and if we can have fun with our children, that's one of the things we haven't mentioned here, but it's so important that there be some fun and some play, some recreational activity for every youth. And there's one other thing. In parenting, there is absolutely no place for sarcasm. And we need to keep that in mind, I think, as we, especially when a child or a youth has disappointed us. You know, because I've heard parents say, oh, that was a great move, son. You know, there's no place for that. It isn't helpful.
And I would think we could also say, in marriage, there's no place for sarcasm. Let's say thank you to the panel for their job.